In this video, I'm just going to run through a diagram that's kind of the way I like to typically build an application if I'm allowed to build it from the ground up. And I'm going to read this diagram, and this is sort of like the corresponding, this is just a Windows Explorer window over here showing some folders, and I've numbered them so that they kind of stack in a similar way to the diagram. So in the diagram, the bottom part, I'm going to read this from the bottom up, by the way. The bottom part is just your SQL Server environment. And ideally, it'd be nice to have 3 different databases. The development database can actually be running on a developer's machine. Like if you have a developer who's just running a Windows desktop machine, that can be running there. And then once you get things done the way you want, you can use migrations to push the structural changes to the staging DB first, which runs on a server. And if that works, then you run the same migrations to the production server. Of course, if that doesn't work, you start over. The staging server is usually a copy of the production server at any one moment in time. So like, let's say you run a migration and it really messes things up. You can just drop the entire staging DB and then make a copy of the production DB, call it staging DB, and off you go to, try again. So that's your SQL Server environment. And then everything above that, these are all Microsoft Access files or groups of files. So they're all running VBA. Some of them are used for, user interface type stuff, and others have nothing but code in them. So let me start over here with data access. As you can see, that's my 6th folder. Remember, I'm kind of going from the bottom to the top here. These are basically access files that wrap DAO code so that you don't need to have table links in any of these other files other than these 2. In other words, those little table links that you often see with the black arrows that point directly to a table in SQL Server, these are the only 2 files that should have them. In fact, I used to do this in one file because it made for just one place to go when I want to point them from the development DB to either the staging or the production DB. I just can change them all in one go. But it's not too hard to do that in 2 files. And since the code was kind of interfering with each other, I went ahead and separated them. So over here on this side, you can see these are like pre-built things that I do quite often. In another video, I'll demonstrate these to you. So a table wrapper by its, can figure out that it basically, for every table, you make a table wrapper, and it allows you to just open a record very quickly, kind of like a model in the MVVM pattern, but a little different because it's based on DAO record sets. Same thing with the SQL builder, but this, you can actually, just say, this is what I want the select clause to be, this is what I want the from clause to be, and you just build this SQL, and it'll return a DAO record set to you. So you don't need table links in any of these other files. So that's data access layer right there. Moving back over here, the business logic layer is basically things like accounting functions and work order functions and just different logic that you have to calculate quite often. You put those functions, methods, procedures in these different types of files, and I just made these real quick just to kind of give you an idea that in a big project there'd be maybe a dozen in here. So anyway, they all point back to the data access layer, so they can have data to do their business logic. Same thing with the application logic, but in that one, and I didn't make the folder for it, darn it. But in that one, it's more things like error handling, PDF conversions, FTP connections to web servers, stuff like that. It can all be done in application logic, but it still needs access to these databases, so it has to go through the data access layer. Now, the main application files are things like data forms. What I call a data form is any form that's based mainly on a single table. Now, I know it can have related records in a subforms, but like, for example, the customer's data form would be where you find a customer's record. You maybe select it from a list or type a few characters into a search box and find the record. And once the record's found, that's what's in the screen, and you can lock or unlock the record. There may be drop-down lists in that form. Some of your fields might be, where you select from a drop-down list, and in that case, if the user has the rights to edit that drop-down list or the contents of it, That's what a list box is. And pull up a list box will pop up in front of the user, and then they can manage what the contents of those drop-down lists are. Those are all kind of part of the data forms. Reports would all go in separate files, but again, it needs some data to report on, so it gets that data from data access. And then the support files, as I mentioned, the list boxes, but you also can segregate dialog boxes. So all this is basically so you can segregate your files and they don't, create like one huge file that contains all your main files. They can be separated into lots of files. And then finally, user interface files would be, the idea here is that you could have multiple user interfaces based on department, based on function, location. You might want one user interface that's just for your stockroom, or just for your warehouse, or just some laptop for like when deliveries come in. You have somebody there that collects the deliveries. Well, he or she needs a user interface to say, okay, it came in by UPS, this was the customer, this was their delivery number, I got it in at this date and time. He needs a little user interface to do that. So with all this other stuff in place, from this all the way down, I'd be able to throw together a user interface in like no time at all. All the tools and objects that I would need to create that would already be built, and I can just build a user interface. So some user interfaces can be very complex, and they can have, every single thing that's available, every data form, every report, every support file. They can have all the business logic, and of course the application logic and the data access is all kind of underpinning it all. But this is the reason why I do it this way, is so that user interfaces, you can make dozens of them. You can have user interface just for one single person if you want, and it would be no problem to build, because all I got to do is build the buttons, set the table references, and tell the code, open the form, open the report. It's all done. Okay, so that's I'll end this video here, because I don't like to make these videos much longer than about 7 minutes. And I hope that gave you a good overview of my approach to making database projects using Microsoft Access and SQL Server, if I have the opportunity to build them from the ground up. When sometimes I have to take over somebody else's work, and it never looks anything like this. So, okay, thank you for your time.